My name's Kath Luker and I was born in the village and I still live in the house in which I was born. I fell in love with history when I was at school and then that drifted off for a bit until 1985, or in the run-up to the 1985 millennium. Mrs. Woolen kept taking me to one side and asking me questions about the village, and I gave her bits and pieces to go in the Millennium book, and that kind of inspired me again. So I started paying a lot more attention to what was going on in the village and around it, and then somewhere down the line I decided it was time to get involved with my own family history, which involved me obviously researching anything I could do about all sides of the family, but it also meant that I got involved with a guy called John Talbot, who's had a lot to do with the village. He's related to most of the Talbots in the village, and because he lived in Middlesex, he used to keep emailing me or ringing me up, can you find this out for me, can you go and take me a picture? So I did that for him, and then I got involved with a project on photographing all the tombstones in the cemetery and the churchyard, which led on to a lot more other things, trying to find out about the people who were in the graves, and therefore going down the route of looking at their family history. And this is where John comes in again, because he had actually transcribed all the parish registers, and so he was able to give me ready-made family trees of lots of the people in the village. Obviously they needed to be checked, and we still have no guarantee that they are correct. But when John knew he was going to die, he passed all his records on to me, so I'm now the holder of everything he had. So at this point the council said, could I help with family history related questions? So I got involved with them, and then anything to do with local history that the council got asked, Stephanie would pass on to me. As far as the history group comes, it's because I'm a trustee of the village hall itself, and it was mooted that it would be a good idea to have a history group that could research and display in the village hall, because it was thought this might be helpful towards grants, etc. And so that's how it started. That's how Keith started it off, and I got involved with it. And as you see from the other people who you've interviewed, they were also enlisted, some quite quickly as they moved into the village. And well, you know, we just keep going forward from there. Having had the exhibition in March, it was so successful, we decided we ought to have one on Harwell and the Wars.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after tomorrow, when the world is free. The shepherd will tend his sheep, the valley will bloom again, and Jimmy will go to sleep in his own little room again. There'll be bluebirds
I'm Jane Card. History is about drawing inferences from traces left by the past, and it's local historians and family historians and archivists in local record office who preserve the traces of the past from which other sorts of historians work. So I think a group like this is very interesting because it's a team of different sorts of historians. We also include a costume historian, and that's quite good. Well, I'm not a real Harwellian in that I've only lived here for 20 years, and I'm not really trained as a local or a family historian. I was trained as a political historian, and I'm currently retraining as a historian of visual culture. So one of my roles in the group is to use my political history knowledge to put local events into a national perspective. So for example, Harwell, to pick an event very distant from the wars, appears 4 times in Domesday Book. And that's very interesting because it shows how wealthy Harwell was. It's divided into 3 manors, and also that it was a source of legal dispute. Now, my work for this exhibition has homed in on the visual culture side. You can learn a great deal about how ordinary people were thinking and what was important to them from political and social cartoons. And a political cartoon is an artist's summary of a political situation, which in a war might be about the causes of the war, or an unwise peace treaty, or the effect of U-boats on food supply. A social cartoon is always about manners and thoughts and social life. Political cartoons are sometimes funny, but they are not always. These 2 are examples of tragic ones. Social cartoons are nearly always funny. Now from World War I, I'm very lucky in that I've got a collection of original magazines from World War I. These are the Bystander magazines with cartoons drawn by Captain Bruce Bairnsfather, who served in the trenches and was invalided out. He invented Old Bill, the old soldier who, when a recruit is complaining about sheltering in a shell hole, says, well, if you know a better hole, go to it. And for a long time, this was a famous national saying. My husband is also not local. His name is Malcolm Vick, and he's a historian of market gardening, agriculture and food. And he does the same thing as I do. He can put local things in a national perspective. So for example, Robert Loader, the cherry grower, is famous among economic historians, and Malcolm can do things like reading secretary hand, 16th century writing, and he understands the economics of what Robert Loader is writing about and why the man is important. Gardens were very important in World War II. Everything that could be ploughed up was ploughed up. And this is one of Fougas's cartoons showing a London square on the left, trees and flowers. On the right, it's full of vegetables. And everybody knows the famous poster, Dig for Victory, which is in fact anatomically impossible.
Right, what's your name?
David Drummond.
What's your part of the history group?
I'm basically part of the history group that looks into aviation in particular. I've been interested in aviation for since I was a child, and I've therefore been talking to Ted Lay, who is a local farmer and aviator, and I've got a display of his memorabilia for the History Society.
Okay. Have you got any exciting exhibits?
We've got several masks, and we've got wreckage from a Spitfire that crashed in Germany, and the pilot of that plane, he was a POW in Germany, and he actually took part in the Great Escape and the wooden horse, so it's at Stalag Luft 3. So that's quite an interesting and unusual exhibit. We've also got a World War I hood type flying mask, and a whole load of other bits and bobs. We've got compasses from a Lancaster, compass from a Spitfire, very old style computer, mechanical computer to allow you to actually calculate your drift due to wind and correct your course. So there's quite a set of interesting memorabilia there from Ted.
Tell us your name
Dee Holes.
and what's your part with the history?
Well, I recently came to the village about a year ago and heard about the History Society and realised that something for the children to do at all the history exhibitions would be very useful, so that their parents can spend more time looking at the other exhibits. And so I concentrate on providing linked activities for the children at all the history exhibitions.
And what things can the children do today?
There's two word searches, one for World War I and one for World War II, that are not particularly connected with the exhibits. There's also a quiz, which they can find the answers by looking around at all the exhibits, so hopefully the family will help them. And I've also got a Harwell family trail that I've produced, which it sort of goes through the whole history of Harwell, and it's for people to do at any time with their family or visitors.
My name's Heather Stevens, and I was born in the pub that used to be called the White Hart and is now the Heart of Harwell in 1946. This research project basically involved the journey of my parents' family coming to Harwell from different parts of the world. My grandmother was born in Bury St Edmunds, and she was involved in the First World War, but in the Second World War she was the landlady of the White Hart. And my father was born in Scotland, and he came down to Harwell to join the RAF, and that was how he met my mother, by going into the village pub, which is obviously how my family ended up in Harwell. And it was quite interesting researching the journey that they'd made and what happened to the various members of the family on the way. Oh, there's the White Hart. The White Hart, that's my grandmother, and this is my grandmother's family. And my grandmother in the First World War was actually a volunteer in a convalescent home, so I did a part about that. And then the journey comes down to Harwell, where my mother and her parents were in the White Hart running the pub, and obviously there was quite a lot of the World War II home front business, because they spent a lot of time, they had pigs, they grew stuff, grew food, bottled it like everybody else did. And my father, on the other hand, he came from Scotland and ended up as an armourer at the RAF Harwell. He did go back to his unit at Waddington a couple of times, but eventually came back to Harwell and stayed in Harwell with my mother, and spent a lot of time working with guinea pig clubs and things like that in the village. I joined the history group initially to find out about the village, and I think my first revelation was at the very first meeting, discovering the mysterious WJB that's been over the door of a house I lived in for some years, being William Bennett, who owned a huge piece of land all the way to Rostock, and I've been gripped ever since. I'm still researching William Bennett because there were several of them, so I've still got that to do, and it's been put aside to do the war pieces that we've done, but everything is ongoing. Basically the story continues with all of it, so they're to be gone back to and covered later on for another exhibition, hopefully.